late one evening during Sesshin, the layperson Myosen had finished her lights out round. She was the Jikido, and she'd just put everybody to bed. Later, back in the Zendo, she approached the priest in training, Shōgen, who was cleaning incense bowls out in front of the abbot's interview room. She quietly asked, "What is the Mahayana philosophy on cockroaches in the Zendo?" Without hesitation, the priest stomped his foot, making a foot as if it were squishing a bug, and said without hesitation, "Wrong place, wrong time." More on the wayward cockroach later and his fate. But I wanted to stop and thank you all for the gift of your presence. This is a particularly wonderful occasion, Zazenkai. We have a Jukai coming tomorrow, and we've got 6 of the 9 recipients with us today, which is wonderful. But I wanted to thank each of you for the part that you're playing and have played in creating the container of this Zazenkai. And Zazenkai means literally to come together for Zazen, or meditation, which is what we're doing. And as most of you know, it has kind of the flavor of a Sesshin, a day of Sesshin. So if you enjoy this and it strikes your fancy and you would like a 5-course meal, come on to a Sesshin and get multiple days. Now I use that koan of the cockroach in the Zendo as kind of a segue into the precepts, because this is kind of a precepts Jukai weekend. And of course that brings into focus the first precept, grave precept of non-killing. But I kind of want to take, for the most part, a broader look at the precepts. And why, you may ask? Well, we have, as I said, 6 of the 9 recipients for tomorrow that are making a major step. I'm always telling my wife about events here at the center, and it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And she said, everything at the center is a big deal. But this is a particularly auspicious event. And so this is kind of the lineup right down on the street side of the Zendo. We have Jeff is here, Eleanor, Kane, Michael, Frank, Maria. What a wonderful way to prepare yourself for tomorrow's ceremony. Some places they actually do a week-long sesshin before taking the jukai or having the ceremony. So that said, we're going to read the precepts, not unlike a day of reflection. When I teach this I do the precepts at the prison. It's an evening of reflection. Yeah. So I'd like the monitors. I have the sheets on either side. If you could pass those out. They're a little different than what we usually read on a day of reflection. These are the Zen Peacemaker Order precepts. So it's got a little different twist to it. I'm thinking these may be actually out for the Sangha at some point. I know Roshi was talking something about that. And when we read them, again, you'll see that they're different. We'll actually read the lead lines, so that recognizing my place, and then say the 3 tenets of a Zen peacemaker. We won't read the number, however, of the 10 precepts. We'll just read the precept. Okay, is everybody on the same page, so to speak? Recognizing my place in the circle of life, I take refuge in Buddha, the oneness of life, Dharma, the diversity of life, Sangha, the interdependence of Buddha and Dharma, the 3 tenets of a Zen peacemaker. Taking refuge in the 3 treasures, I vow to live a life of not knowing by giving up fixed ideas about ourselves and the universe, bearing witness to the joy and suffering of the world, taking action that arises from not knowing and bearing witness. 10 precepts of a Zen peacemaker. Embodying the 3 tenets, I practice these precepts. Recognizing that I am not separate from all that is. This is the precept of non-killing. Being satisfied with what I have. This is the precept of non-stealing. Meeting the diversity of life with respect and dignity. This is the precept of chaste conduct. Listening and speaking from the heart. This is the precept of non-lying. Cultivating a mind that sees clearly. This is the precept of not being ignorant. Bearing witness to the offering of each moment. This is the precept of not talking about others' errors and faults. Speaking what I perceive to be the truth. This is the precept of not elevating myself and blaming others. Using all the ingredients of my life. This is the precept of not being stingy. Bearing witness to emotions that arise. This is the precept of not holding on to anger. Honoring my life as a peacemaker. This is the precept of not disparaging the 3 treasures. And if you could pick those up. So the precepts are no small matter in the life of a Buddhist, especially here at the Zen Center. We see them cropping up everywhere. They're actually in our mission statement. Our mission is to know the self, maintain the precepts, and serve others. We've been refining the ethics policies. And Roshi's calling this weaving the Sutra of Sangha life. Now, most of these documents have been around for a while, but they're being massaged once again. And that includes the statement of right conduct, the teacher's ethics statement, grievance procedure as well. We have, as I mentioned earlier, a monthly day of reflection where we pick out one of the precepts and concentrate on that. Usually a student will give a short 15-minute talk, and then we go down to the Dharma hall and do counsel over this. So we kind of share what's coming up for us on each of the precepts. We have atonement ceremonies, and that's what, every 6 weeks or so here?
More or less.
More or less. And that's a time to, as we say, become at one with. And it's also a time of renewing vows. And so those of you that are taking these precepts, you're highly encouraged to participate in that ceremony as often as you can. I feel cheated because I'm a commuter. I'm up in San Luis Obispo, and usually it's one time a year, I think at year end, that I get down here for that. That said, we are trying, I work with a prison group up there, and we're trying to get our own atonement ceremony, and our sitting group likewise to have an atonement ceremony, so we don't get left out. There's Jukai ceremonies that we've talked about where you're receiving the precepts. There's Tokudo, that's the priest ordination. And you know what? It's almost the exact same thing. You're taking on the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. If you've seen both those ceremonies. Jeff, I know you haven't. The Denkai process, this is with the students that are kind of working toward becoming teachers. Likewise, a lot of time spent in dealing with the precepts, where there's a small study group going on right now, going over Yasutani Roshi's precepts, and really in-depth. Zen Peacemaker Order, it's one of their basic practices, just like it is here. And that's what we read. This was right off their webpage. The Soto Zen Buddhists of America Association, same thing, precepts. So, why are they so important? These words on paper. Well, they go back a long way in our lineage. If you remember the ending 4 lines of the poem that I read at the Founders Service this morning. No evil is committed, every good is done, keeping your mind pure. All this is the teachings of the Buddha. This is considered one of the most fundamental Buddhist verses on the precepts. Goes back a long way. Japanese, Shichibutsu Sukai Noge. And that means that the precepts verse of the 7 Buddhas, the precepts verse of the 7 Buddhas before Shakyamuni Buddha. So that goes back a ways. They've been around a long time. And back then, it was actually, as I read, it was the Sangha was pretty loose-knit group. Buddha wasn't an authoritarian figure. And what would happen was the wandering bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, which were the monks and nuns wandering around India, they would gather, and it says only every 6 years, to recite. Part of this was, it's a common confession of faith called the Patimokkha, or bond. And it was an important event, I guess every 6 years it must be, and you weren't supposed to miss that. You were supposed to be there for that. And of course, when Buddha dies, this evolves into a much more complex system. And the number of precepts varies from tradition to tradition. The Theravada tradition historically has 5 for the layperson, and the monks and nuns have an additional 5 that kind of relate with monastic life. And at the prison where I work, the California Men's Colony, it's interesting, we recite the Theravadan precepts every week. And we do them in English for a month, and then in Pali, just like here that we alternate between English and Sino-Japanese on some of our sutras. And you'll recognize these. I undertake the training to abstain from killing. I undertake the training to abstain from taking what is not given. I undertake the training to abstain from sexual misconduct. I undertake the training to abstain from wrongful speech. I undertake the training to abstain from alcohol and intoxicants contributing to heedlessness. Sounds pretty familiar. We just elaborate them into more. And I think as the Mahayanas tend to, the Mahayana monks had up to 250 precepts. The Mahayana nuns, 348. That's another talk about why that happened. But it was how to wash, how to sleep, how to avoid gossip, how to avoid insulting. And my favorite from the women's list, was how to avoid engaging in seductive magic. And of course, in our Zen tradition, Dogen, founder of our school, gave the 16 Bodhisattva precepts to his monastic students as well as his lay students. And that's what we do today. They're called, again, here's another Japanese name, Buso Shoden Bosatsukai, the Bodhisattva precepts that have been correctly transmitted by Buddhas and ancestors. It's kind of interesting at the prison about how all this evolved. We do kind of 3 services like we would do here during a regular morning, but it's a blend. And it's a blend because of all the various traditions that have come through the prison. So it was originally Theravadan monks that came in. So we have all these Pali texts that we read. And then there were the Vipassana people that came in, and there were Tibetan people that came in, and kind of the last wave has been Zen. So it's this kind of, almost a hodgepodge, if you will, but it's really quite beautiful. And Sensei Koan and those of you that know Master Nagasita Buckley, they come up there, used to. Koan still does, but Nagi doesn't. But they've given the precepts, had Jukai ceremony there for, I think it's about 10 or 12 inmates, and they use the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. So again, what's going on with these precepts? Yeah, they go along way back. They're a big tradition. But who cares about a bunch of rules and regulations for monks and nuns from so long ago? And sometimes I hear from folks that, this old stuff just doesn't relate to our time, here and now. But last time I looked, greed, hatred, and ignorance are still alive and well right now, right here. And doesn't all this connect, for me it does anyway, with Sangha, this whole precepts? I mean, that's why they arose. There were guidelines, rules, and regulations because people, monks and nuns originally, got together, living together. Whenever that happens, you need to put signal lights in and so forth so you don't have a lot of commotion. Now, I personally harbor romantic notions too about this, what would you call it, this spiritual journey. And I like the idea of the old poets of China, the hermits that in their caves, living in shacks, small sheds. The stone house is a famous poet that I really like, a hermit poet, and Cold Mountain, Ryokan. I love these guys. But the fact is, even these hermits, these recluses, were part of a culture. And in fact, in the culture that they were in, it was real common for folks to support them. So they always had to have some kind of support from lay people, maybe other monks, in order to support their practice that may have been out in the hinterlands. So we're all connected. And to flip from the Buddhist tradition back to English, I love the poet John Donne, and I know that you've had to have heard this in high school, but it's the No Man is an Island. And I have it on good authority that this could be No Woman is an Island as well. But it goes, no man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Everybody remember that? I think that's high school English. Gombrich was a writer of Theravada Buddhism, and he said, the Sangha is the heart of Buddhism because its lifestyle embodies externally the inner state of nibbana or nirvana. And as I was kind of doing research for this, I've read actually a couple times, Karen Armstrong has a history on the Buddha, which I recommend. And as I was looking about references for Sangha, she had this to say. The lifestyle of the Sangha, this was about the historical Sanghas, enables its members to meditate and thus to dispel the fires of ignorance, greed, and hatred that bind us to the wheel of suffering. The ideal of compassion and communal love teaches them to lay aside their own egotism and live for others. By making these attitudes habitual, nuns and monks and laypersons, I threw that in, can acquire that unshakable inner peace which is nirvana, the goal of the holy life. And this I found to be inspiring and very interesting, what she said next. The Sangha is one of the oldest surviving voluntary institutions on the earth. Only the Jain order can boast a similar antiquity. Its endurance tells us something important about humanity and human life. And this is what I meant that I thought was pretty inspiring. The great empires, manned by vast armies of soldiers, have all crumbled. The message seems to be that it is not by protecting and defending yourself that you survive, but by giving yourself away. Sangha. There's a cute story of this guy that dies, goes to what he's thinking is heaven. Beautiful place. Walks in, it's a banquet hall, huge table, and there's this sumptuous feast on the table. It looks great. So he's thinking, I made it. I must have lived a better life than I thought. Sits down and grabs his fork, takes some food, and just as he's about to lift up his arm, somebody from behind him comes up and puts boards on his arms. So he can't bend his arm. He can't get the food to his mouth. And he's saying, this must be hell. So what's heaven like? And this beatific creature comes up to him and takes him to the next room down. Another banquet hall. Same big table. Wonderful food. And he sits down, a little leery now, looking around, does the same thing. Grabs his fork, goes to pick it up. Once again, somebody comes from behind him, plasters the boards on. He can't bend his arm. Suddenly he looks up, and there across the table was somebody, same thing, with boards on their arms, fork in hand, food on the fork, and he's feeding the person to his right. And he looks around, and everybody's doing the same thing. This must be heaven. Now I thought about that. So what if you have a lefty? I think you're back into the hell realm once again. So I was thinking maybe we should do that for Oryoki. And really help one another out. So that's lofty language from Karen Armstrong and a cute story about helping one another. But how does this translate into the day in and day out of Sangha life right here on Great Dragon Mountain? My father-in-law, Sterling Dare, actually was a hermit living out in the desert of Arizona. He had a rock tumbler to make jewelry as a hobby. And I don't know if any of you have seen that or experienced it, but you take unfinished rocks with rough, jagged edges and throw them into the tumbler. And of course the rocks are bumping and grinding against one another. And typically a full, they call it a tumble polish, from rough rock to polish takes about 3 to 5 weeks. Usually it's in 3 steps. Initially the rocks are smoothed with coarse grit, and then this is followed by washing, and then a stage of finer grits are put in. And the final step is a polishing stage. That's a rock and a rock tumbler. In the Sangha tumbler, I heard it can take more than 3 to 5 weeks. It may take years. I've heard decades. Sensei Daishin used to talk about that, and I love that story. And when I was thinking about that, what also came up was Pema Chodron. If some of you have read her, she has a line about softening that which is hard in your heart. And I really like that phrase. So I often hear from residents that we commuters are lucky in that we always don't see what's going on in the tumbler here. That may be true, or maybe someone's opinion, but don't we all have similar circumstances in our workplaces, with fellow employees, with bosses, with families, with friends? So the flip side of that is that living here, at least there is this shared intention. Roshi just sent an email out yesterday that said a Sangha comes into being when people take refuge in the 3 treasures. Most of our outside lives and the relationships that we have, those folks aren't into that. They're not taking refuge in the 3 treasures. So they don't have our precepts. They don't have our counsel practice. So what I'm saying is, it ain't so easy out there either. My oldest granddaughter, speaking of milestones, just graduated from high school last Thursday night up in Arroyo Grande. And much of our dysfunctional, often estranged family was there. They were there to witness this milestone. One daughter was there with her 4 daughters. One of my daughters. And the girl that was graduating was one of her daughters, her oldest daughter. And of the 4, there's 3 biological fathers. 2 of the 3 were there. One is an ex-husband, and the other was never married to my daughter. She was pregnant in high school. The grandparents of the never married biological father were there, sitting with us and the ex-husband. The biological father, their son, was on the other side of the stadium. So here is this, our granddaughter, this wonderful, unbelievably artistic young lady. And I really now can't imagine my life without her. She just moved in with us, by the way. And I remember sharing this years ago here at the center. When Kendra was pregnant with her in high school, I was the one really pushing for abortion. And there's my granddaughter, 18 years old. This absolutely wonderful young lady. So life is messy. It really is messy. And you know what? It was wonderful. We all came together. We've all been connected now for 18 years or longer. And we came there because of the shared love we have for the graduate. So how's your life? A little messy? Or am I the only one?
You're the only one.
So we do the best we can. We can be thankful for the precepts, the practice, our counsel practice, our fellow practitioners, our Dharma brothers and sisters. Bernie Glassman has some great imagery that some of you may have read about. He talks about the precepts are like a glass. Did you get that in the precept class? They talk about Bernie. He says about having a glass and thinking of it as one of the precepts. Every moment we're dirtying and muddying, leaving traces in the glass. Yeah. Why? Because we're using it. It's life. He said even if we just leave it where it is without using it, it still gets dirty, especially here in Los Angeles. San Luis Obispo, we have a high pollen count, so it would have a lot of pollen on it. Violating the precepts is getting the glass dirty. Breaking them, breaking the glass, that would be deliberately smashing it. So we say that anything short of complete breakdown or suicide is not breaking the precepts, but violating them. Anything short of actual self-destruction is a violation we constantly atone for by cleaning the glass. And how often do you clean glasses at home and do dishes and brush your teeth and go to the bathroom? It's never ending, over and over again. In a recent face-to-face, Roshi commented, she said, "Shōgen, you sure are trying to keep a lot of stuff together. It will fall apart." I replied, "It already has on numerous occasions." She said, "Good." When do we close? I didn't look at the 3:30? Okay, I've only got 10 minutes. Okay, what a journey it's been for you six, right? A lot of study, working with Faith Mind and Dharma Joy and Roshi, You've written essays, I'm sure. Some of you may have done poems or artwork to connect with your precept. Where did it all begin for you? At some point you said to yourself, I'm taking the Buddhist path and vowing to live my life maintaining the precepts. Now this may have been a long time ago. Matter of fact, I know for some of you it was a long time ago because I've talked to you earlier today. Sensei Koan tells of being here at ZCLA for 9 years before he took the precepts. For me, it was sometime in college. I was reading a book, and it may have been Houston Smith's, some comparative religion, and I just completely resonated with what he said, with Buddhism in general, with Zen in particular. And I made a commitment back there. I made a vow back then that I was going to take the precepts. John Daido Lori, speaks to this about what he says is bringing the sacred to life. And liturgy, and this ceremony that you'll be going through is considered liturgy. There are moments of important transitions in our lives: birth, marriage, ordination, death. There are opportunities for us to reflect on the teaching and to see how it applies to what we're doing. He said in the case of marriage, the couple is already united in their own minds, but the union is invisible to others until it is revealed and manifested in a marriage ceremony. A formal Zen marriage ceremony is performed only after the couple have already married one another. Only they can marry themselves. And it's the same for taking this lay ordination, because what you're doing is really lay ordination. The ceremony merely makes it visible to the community so that everyone can then share and participate in the event with you. There's no magic to be given. The magic is already yours. All liturgy can do is render it visible to those who love you. This making visible, he says, making visible the invisible is at the heart of the matter. So back to the cockroach story. This koan was kind of based on a true story. It was the last sesshin. And I'll have to say, that cockroach that Myoshin showed me following the exchange was arguably the largest cockroach I have ever seen in my life. And I've been to Texas. Right over there behind Jitsujo was where that cockroach was scampering. This thing was big enough you could have saddled this thing. It was that big. Also connected with that, my reply was another old story. This goes back many years before my time here, and the center used to own a number of buildings, not only in this block but close by. And they were renovating a building, I think, to make the Chosen Bay's medical clinic. And so they were in a 2-story apartment house ripping out stuff. And Maizumi Roshi was there, ripped out one of the cupboards in a kitchen, and there are not only hundreds of dead cockroaches, but a heck of a lot of live ones. And the picture is Maizumi, wrong time, wrong place, wrong time, wrong place, wrong time, wrong place. I love that. And of course, this points us to the different views of the koans. And all of you have done this, looking at the perspectives of the koans. right? The intrinsic, relational, and the literal. Literal, simply do not kill. Don't do it. But how can you really do that? Who can do that? You can go to an extreme, like they did in India, have the mask on and have one of the lower caste folks sweeping in front of you so you wouldn't hurt any bugs. But those guys still had germs and bacteria in them that were dying. Relational, which is you're considering time, place, quantity, and amount. So cockroach in the Zendo. Maybe not conducive to Zazen. Maybe not healthy. Intrinsic. This whole idea of killing isn't even possible. Yasutani Roshi says this is the view of one body. Nothing is being born and nothing is dying. Just continual change. There's no one to kill, no one to be killed, and no such thing as killing. You know, there's dark sides to everything that we do. So what's the dark side of that intrinsic viewpoint?
It would be easy to be a serial killer then.
Yeah. It's anything goes. Anything goes. But that's when they're seen separately, not in relation. And we look at these separately, but the fact is they're all combined. They're all combined. So what happened to the cockroach?
You took it outside.
Myosin and I captured that sucker and took him outside and put him underneath one of the, as I call them, the belted redwood trees. Was that good? I don't know. Maybe up in Udo's apartment, now in the kitchen.
We barbecued it.
All of life is of course, extreme importance. But a lot of things are relative. There's the mundane and not so mundane. I was starting a precept class at the prison, California Men's Colony again. We were going to do a study. And this was when I first really started there. I'd only been there maybe 6 months. And so it was my job to interview the inmates. And so I had this little spiel that I had worked up, and we were supposed to see if they really had an interest. They really were going to be a good part of the class, a good match. And so I would go in with my talk, and I would always use this first precept, this non-killing, as kind of an example. And I would go into this and say, I'm vegan, but I still kill. I drive to the Zen Center almost every weekend, and there are bugs all over my car. And, kind of making the point that even if you're a vegetarian or whatever, that it's still not possible. And the inmate leaned forward in his chair and looked me in the eye and said, "Yeah, I work with this precept every day. I'm in here for murder." And it wasn't just random. This was somebody I loved. Whoa. My time is out. I'll end with another saying from John Daido Lori Roshi. The possibilities that compose the spectrum of human experience are your possibilities. All space and all time come alive in each one of us. How we practice and realize our lives depends on what we invoke what we call forth. Regardless of whether we appreciate this fact or not, we are ceaselessly invoking. So, what will it be? Will it be greed or will it be compassion? Will it be anger or will it be wisdom? Will it be ignorance or will it be enlightenment? It's all in our hands. How do we invoke a vow and practice that vow in our lives? We should examine this question thoroughly and keep examining it forever. The best part of a Zazen Kai and Sesshin talk is that there are no question and answer periods.